The moment I remember most clearly isn't the one where my father threw my suitcase onto the front porch in November. It isn't the one where my mother stood behind the storm door with her arms crossed, not crying, just watching me pick it up off the concrete. It isn't even the courtroom years later, when a judge with reading glasses and a voice like settled water read 5 words that changed everything my family had been pretending was true. The moment I remember most clearly is the one nobody ever talks about. It happened 3 days before my father changed the locks. I was 16 years old, 6 months pregnant, and sitting at the kitchen table where we had eaten dinner together every single night of my entire life. My mother was at the counter with her back to me. She was making tea. She filled her own mug in my father's mug. She did not fill a third one. She had never, in 16 years, forgotten to fill a third one. She did not say anything. She did not turn around. She just carried both mugs to the table and sat down and looked at the steam rising from her cup, and she did not look at me at all. That was when I understood. Not when they told me I needed to figure out my situation. Not when my father said the words "this family has standards" in a voice that sounded like a door being locked from the inside. Not even when my mother called my Aunt Delphine and arranged, with the efficiency of a woman canceling a subscription, for someone to come and collect me. The tea was when I understood. Because it was so ordinary. Because she had simply stopped including me in something she did without thinking. And that absence, that thoughtless automatic exclusion, told me more about where I stood than anything they would ever say out loud. My name is Renata Calloway. I was born in a mid-sized town in Ohio that prides itself on church attendance, clean gutters, and the quiet community understanding that certain things simply do not happen in good families. I was the oldest of 3 children. I was the honor student. I was in the orchestra, second violin, nothing spectacular, but I showed up to every rehearsal. I had a 3.9 GPA, and a perfect attendance certificate from the 8th grade still pinned to the bulletin board in my bedroom. I was the one who was supposed to go somewhere. And when I was 16, I got pregnant, and my parents decided that I had destroyed something they valued far more than me, which turned out to be a version of themselves they had been performing for the neighborhood since before I was born. They gave me 11 days. 11 days between the moment I told them and the morning my father appeared at my bedroom door with my 2 largest bags already packed, which meant he had gone through my drawers while I was sleeping, which is a detail I have never been fully able to set down. No conversation about options. No referral to a counselor or a doctor. No one asking me who the father was or whether I was frightened or what I needed or what I wanted. Just the bags. My Aunt Delphine, my mother's older sister, came and picked me up in a green Subaru with a broken passenger window that let in cold November air the entire 45-minute drive. I had 2 bags. I had a winter coat that no longer zipped over my stomach. I had a library book I'd forgotten to return, Wuthering Heights, due back the previous Thursday. I was 6 months and 1 week pregnant, and my parents had already begun telling people I was studying abroad. If you've ever had your family decide that the version of you that embarrasses them is easier to bury than support, if you know what it feels like to be quietly packed up and removed from the story like a piece of furniture that no longer fits the room, stay with me. Because this story does not end at that porch. It ends in a courtroom 14 years later, with documents my family never anticipated, and a judge who said exactly 5 words I had been waiting my entire adult life to hear. Aunt Delphine's house was a 2-bedroom craftsman that smelled like coffee and eucalyptus, and the particular quiet that belongs to someone who has learned to live alone and made peace with it. She was 61, a retired nurse, with short silver hair and the hands of someone who has spent decades doing precise, necessary things. She was not warm in the way movies mean warm. She didn't pull me into a hug at the door. She didn't say anything soft or reassuring. She looked at my bags, looked at my stomach, looked at my face, all 3 in quick succession. She pointed to the bedroom on the left. Shoes off in the house. Dishes done the same night you used them. Doctor's appointment Thursday at 9. Do you need me to write that down? That was the whole speech. No pity. No performance of rescue. Just the clean logistics of being alive and cared for. And I want to tell you something about that because it matters for understanding everything that came later. That spare, unsentimental version of love, the kind that shows up in appointment reminders and a bedroom pointed to without hesitation, was the most dignity I had been shown in months, possibly years. I didn't understand that fully then. I just know I took my shoes off at the door without being asked a second time, and I have done it in every home I've entered since. I want to be honest about what those early years actually looked like, because I am not interested in making this sound cleaner or more cinematic than it was. I had my daughter in February. I named her Sarah, after a name I'd found in a novel I was reading for school, a word that meant evening in a language I couldn't speak, and that felt like what she was, something that arrived when the light was almost gone. She was born on a Tuesday at 4:42 in the afternoon, in a hospital room where Aunt Delphine held one of my hands and a nurse I had never met held the other. Nobody else came. There were no grandparents in the waiting room, no flowers from my mother, no voice message from my father, no balloons. Delphine drove us home 2 days later, and there was a bowl of chicken soup in the refrigerator with a sticky note on the lid that said "Eat this" in her handwriting. That is, in retrospect, one of the most loving things anyone has ever done for me. I slept when Sarah slept. I cried exactly twice in those first 3 weeks. Once when I was too exhausted to locate a reason to keep going, and once when Sarah made a sound, not a cry, just a small involuntary noise in her sleep, that was so unmistakably human that it rearranged something structural in my chest. I finished high school through a correspondence program. I sat at Delphine's kitchen table with textbooks while Sarah napped in a bouncy seat beside me, one hand on the page and one hand on the edge of the seat. I graduated on time, but there was no ceremony for me to attend, because there was no one to watch Sarah and I was not going to ask my family, and I received my diploma in a flat cardboard envelope in the mail and put it in a folder. 3 days later I started work at a pharmacy. I was 17 behind the pharmacy counter. I was the girl who had clearly just had a baby and was not wearing a ring, and I could feel people in the neighborhood noticing and performing the decision not to comment. Some were kind in the careful, calibrated way people are kind when they have decided someone deserves pity. I did not want pity. I wanted the register to balance and my shift to end on time so I could get back to Sarah. It was in that job that I first began to understand the particular power of paperwork. Not in any grand way. Just the daily reality of prescription records and insurance codes and billing disputes, and the way that when a customer insisted a medication had been authorized and the computer said it hadn't, what mattered was the record. Not the customer's certainty. Not the pharmacist's memory. Not anyone's account of what had been said on the phone. The record. The date. The authorization code. The number in the system. I took that lesson seriously in ways I did not fully understand at the time. I started keeping files. Not obsessively, just practically. Bank statements in a folder by year. Lease agreements. Letters from my health insurance company. Anything official, anything dated, anything with a signature on it. I kept them in a fireproof box I bought secondhand for $12 from an estate sale Delphine brought me to one Saturday. It smelled like cedar and someone else's history. I put my files in it and pushed it under my bed and did not think about it very much, but I also never threw anything away. By 18 I had saved enough for 2 community college courses, English composition and introduction to business, Tuesday and Thursday evenings while Delphine watched Sarah. I was good at both, but particularly at the business course, which turned out to be mostly about reading documents and understanding what they obligated people to. My professor, a retired CPA named Mr. Dunmore who wore the same cardigan to every class, said once that a contract is just a record of what 2 people agreed to before one of them decided to forget. I wrote that in my notebook. I still have the notebook. By 19 I was full-time at the community college on a need-based grant and a partial scholarship I had applied for at Delphine's kitchen table on a Tuesday night with Sarah asleep in the next room. By 20 I transferred to a 4-year university 40 minutes away. I commuted every day in a used Honda that had 140,000 miles on it when I bought it and 178,000 by the time I graduated. I drove those 40 minutes every morning at 6:45 with a travel mug of coffee and a bag with Sarah's daycare things and my own books, and I drove them again every afternoon, and in the in-between hours I became slowly and stubbornly a person with a degree. I graduated at 24, a year behind the standard timeline because I took a semester off when Delphine had her hip replaced, and there was no one else to manage her recovery. I handled her post-surgical appointments, her medication schedule, her physical therapy rides, and Sarah's daycare pickups and school events, all of it, for 4 months. I did not resent it. Delphine had given me something I have never been able to fully repay in any conventional sense, and being present for her during that recovery was not a sacrifice. It was just what you do for people who didn't leave. After graduation I moved into insurance, claims processing, first for a mid-sized regional insurer, then for a larger national company. I was good at it in the specific way that people are good at things that align exactly with their natural dispositions. reading documents carefully, looking at dates and amounts and signature lines and noticing when things do not align, understanding the difference between what a policy says and what a claimant believes it says, and what that difference costs in practice. It was not glamorous work. It was necessary work, and it paid reliably, and it trained me without my consciously realizing it, for exactly the situation that was coming. I am telling you all of this not for sympathy, I mean that genuinely, but because my parents, my mother in particular, had developed during those years a practiced and layered way of describing my life as a consequence, as ongoing evidence that their decision had been the correct one. She would say things at church to relatives, to the women she had known for 30 years, in the careful language of people who have rehearsed their own innocence for so long they have actually come to believe it, that Renata had made her choices and the family had done what it had to do to protect itself, that they had tried, that I had been difficult, that some people, regardless of what you give them, simply cannot be helped. I did not hear this directly. I heard it in the specific, loaded pauses of cousins who felt guilty knowing it. In a holiday card from my grandmother that had a postscript so careful and compressed it almost wasn't there. In my brother Marcus, who called me twice a year, always from outside, always in a lowered voice, who carried the particular exhaustion of someone who has been managing a secret they didn't choose to be given. Marcus was 4 years younger than me. He was 14 when I left. He had grown up in the house after I was gone, and he had learned to navigate it with the care of someone who knows there are certain rooms you don't walk into at full speed. He and I had a real relationship, not performed, not managed. He visited twice a year, ate at my table, sat on my living room floor with Sarah and played whatever game she had decided was currently mandatory. He never asked me to soften anything or suggested I should reach out first. He just showed up consistently with his particular mix of warmth and guilt, and I loved him even when loving him was complicated. My parents reached out to me twice in the first 4 years after I left. The first time was when my grandfather was dying, not to tell me they wanted me there, but to ask me not to come to the hospital because it would create a situation. I understood what situation meant. I understood it exactly. I did not go. I sat in Delphine's living room that evening, and she sat with me, and we watched television with the specific mutual silence of two people who have agreed not to say the thing they are both thinking because saying it would not help anything. It was its own kind of grace. The second communication was a letter, 3 pages handwritten, on the pale blue stationery my mother has used since before I was born. I will not reproduce it in full because I have read it enough times that it lives in my body rather than my memory now. What it said, in its layered careful language, was, what happened had been painful for everyone. They hoped I was doing well. They hoped I understood the position I had put the family in. If I was willing to conduct myself with maturity, there might be a path forward. There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of anything they had done, or that they had done anything at all. There was no mention of Sarah. Not her name. Not her existence. Not the granddaughter they had never held, who was at that point 2 years old and learning to run and obsessed with a picture book about a caterpillar. 3 pages about how painful things had been. And the child I was raising was simply not in the letter. Kept it. I folded it and put it in a manila folder with the date on the front in black marker. I kept the envelope too with the postmark. I keep everything. I did not know yet, at 20 years old, exactly why I was keeping everything. I do now. When Sarah was 5, Delphine had a cardiac episode, less serious than it could have been, but enough that her doctor recommended someone in the house. I moved back in. It was not a hardship. It was right, and Delphine was right. And being right in that way felt better than almost anything else available to me at the time. Around this period, Sarah 5, me 21, my parents began a selective re-engagement. It started with a birthday card for Sarah. No return address, my mother's handwriting, a drawing of a purple flower made with colored pencils. I showed it to Delphine. She looked at it for a long time. She set it back on the table and said, "She's testing the water." She didn't tell me what to do with it. She didn't need to. Then a message through Marcus. My parents wanted to know if they could meet Sarah. Not see me. Not address anything that had happened. Just meet Sarah, as though she were a neutral quantity, a grandchild owed access to without the complication of accounting for what had been done to her mother. As though the child could be extracted cleanly from the context of her existence and presented as a fresh start. I did not respond immediately. I have a habit, built in those years at Delphine's table, one hand on a textbook and one hand on a bouncy seat, of letting patterns complete before I decide anything. I waited 4 months. Then I told Marcus, I'm open to a conversation. Let's start with a phone call. My mother called on a Sunday afternoon in April. The first time I had heard her voice in 6 years. She did not apologize. She asked about Sarah's school and the house and my work. She mentioned her book club. She talked about Marcus's new job. She talked about a cousin's engagement. She talked for 22 minutes. And I timed the call on my watch with a precision that had become second nature to me by then. At minute 17 she said, and I can give you the exact words because I wrote them down within 10 minutes of hanging up. I hope you know we never stopped thinking about you, Renata. I want to tell you what that sentence did to me. Not in the moment, I was controlled in the moment as I almost always am. It is perhaps the skill I have developed most thoroughly in my life, but in the days after. Because that sentence was so precisely built to sound like love while doing none of love's actual work, that it clarified something I had been trying to name for years. My mother is not, I believe, a cruel woman. She is a woman who needed the world to reflect a particular story back to her about herself. A good mother, a strong family, a woman who makes hard decisions for the right reasons. And when I stopped fitting the story, she found a way to keep telling it without me. The problem she had never solved was how to want me back in the story without acknowledging what she had done to write me out of it. That Sunday phone call was the opening move in figuring it out. It was a negotiation. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it is true, and because understanding it clearly was what eventually protected me. Over the next 2 years I allowed a careful limited re-entry. Sunday dinners 3 or 4 times a year. Always with enough other relatives present that no difficult conversation could take root. A birthday gathering or 2. My parents met Sarah when she was 7. She was wearing a bright green jacket, a hand-me-down from a neighbor's daughter, her absolute favorite, with a small embroidered star on the pocket, and she shook my father's hand the way I had told her to, because she always does what I tell her to do. My mother cried, quietly, one hand briefly over her mouth. My father crouched to Sarah's level and looked at her face with an expression I had never seen him direct at anything small and new, and he said to me rather than to her, "She has your eyes." He was right. She has my eyes and my stubbornness, and I have increasingly come to understand my grandfather's instinct for making important things concrete. But here is what was also happening during those 2 years of careful re-entry. What I did not yet know. What I was about to discover. My parents had an estate. They were not wealthy. My father had worked 30 years in county facilities management. My mother had been a dental practice bookkeeper until she retired. But they had a paid-off house assessed at $340,000, and a savings portfolio my father had been quietly building since his late 30s that had grown to just under $220,000. These numbers are not the point. I mention them only because they are part of the context in which a different, older, smaller amount makes sense. The case was about a custodial savings account my grandfather had opened in my name the year I was born. He was an accountant, quiet, precise, a man who had spent 40 years turning abstract obligations into concrete records, who believed that love without structure was incomplete. He told me about this account himself when I was 15. Summer evening, his back porch, watching the birds at the feeder he'd hung from the eave. He told me the bank's name. He read me the account number twice slowly, the way you read something aloud when you want it to stay with someone. He told me the balance at that point, just over $39,000. He told me it would transfer to me at 25. No conditions. No strings attached. He said, I wanted you to have a foundation. Something that's yours regardless of what happens. He did not explain what he thought might happen. He was 74. I was 15. I filed the information in the precise, careful part of my memory where I store things I am not yet ready to use, and I did not consciously reach for it again for 15 years. He died when I was 19. I was not at his bedside. My parents had communicated through Marcus that it was not a good time for a visit. Marcus passed the message with visible, helpless distress. I sat in Delphine's living room that evening and she told me something she had apparently needed to say for years, that she had disagreed deeply and consistently with the way my mother had handled things from the beginning, and that she wanted me to know, regardless of how the family had arranged its narrative, that I had always been exactly what a person should be. That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. I have kept it in a different kind of folder, the internal one, the one that doesn't burn. After my grandfather died, no one mentioned the account. Not in the estate communications Marcus relayed to me. Not in any conversation. Not in the blue stationery letter. In the early years I half convinced myself I had misremembered details, but the account number my grandfather had read to me twice on that summer porch sat in the bottom of my memory like a stone in clear water. I could always see it. I kept not reaching for it. Until the Sunday in October when Sarah was 9 and my father sat at their kitchen table, new pale floors, good coffee, and said with the preamble of a man who has rehearsed something that they had been working on getting their affairs in order, that the will had been updated, that I was included. He said included with emphasis, the weight of a man offering something he knew the other person had no means to verify. And that is when I realized this hadn't been planned in a week. It had been building for years. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday photograph, every careful act of performed reconciliation, all of it had the texture of people managing a situation. The situation I was beginning to understand was me. Specifically, what I might know or might eventually remember to ask about. I drove home that night with Sarah asleep in the back seat, and I sat in my own driveway for 7 minutes after I parked. Then I went inside and I made a list. I went through every piece of paper I had ever kept that related to my family and money. The fireproof box under my bed. The labeled folders. Everything dated, everything official, everything signed. It is not paranoia. It is the habit of someone who has spent years in claims processing and learned that the record of what actually happened is more reliable than any person's account of it, including the accounts of people who genuinely believe what they are saying. In a folder from my late teens I found a birthday card my grandfather had sent me when I was 17. Old-fashioned, a photograph of a lake on the front. Inside his birthday message, in his accountant's handwriting, precise and even, the kind you develop when accuracy has professional consequences, he had added a single line. The account is growing well. It will be there for you at 25. I check it every quarter. His signature. I was 30 years old when I sat with that card again. I had been 25 for 5 years. And then I found something else. Something Delphine had given me on my 25th birthday in a plain white envelope with just my name on the front, saying your grandfather wanted you to have this and I have been waiting to know when the time was right and I think it might be now. A 4-page letter my grandfather had written to me the year before he died. It was not a legal document. It was a grandfather writing to a granddaughter. It described the account, the bank, the balance at the time of writing, and his intention, that the money come to me at 25 and be used for whatever made me most free. It described his hopes for my life in a way that made me feel, reading it at 30, like someone had been watching the whole time and had taken notes. And it described Sarah, by name in full, with the warmth of a man who had held her in his lap one afternoon and seen something he recognized immediately. He wrote, "Your daughter is remarkable. She looked at me as though she already knew something. I have made sure there will be enough for both of you. I want you to have a foundation, something that belongs to you regardless of what anyone else decides." I wrote to the bank the following week. Formal letter. Account number. My full legal name. My grandfather's name and death date. The bank's first response said no active account could be found. I wrote back and asked specifically for any records of closed or transferred accounts associated with that account number and beneficiary designation. I waited 3 weeks. The second letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, and I opened it at my kitchen counter in my work clothes with Sarah's breakfast dishes still in the drying rack. The account had been closed 8 years prior. The closure had been authorized under a power of attorney. The signature on the authorization form belonged to my mother. I read that sentence 4 times. I set the letter down. I picked it up and read it again. I went to work. I processed claims for 8 hours with the professional composure that has been my primary survival mechanism for the better part of 15 years. I came home. I made dinner. I put Sarah to bed. I came back to the kitchen and picked the letter up and held it in the quiet. My mother had closed my grandfather's account. She had signed for it. She had taken $42,000, the principal, grown from $39,000, plus 8 years of compounded interest, that a man had set aside by name for his granddaughter, and she had redirected it. The paper said exactly what had happened, and the paper did not misremember, and the paper did not reframe, and the paper was not susceptible to anyone's account of what they had meant to do or believed they were authorized to do. I was not explosive about this. I want you to understand that about me. I did not call my mother. I did not confront anyone. I sat in my kitchen with the letter and the quiet and the sound of my daughter sleeping, and I understood completely that I had been right for 14 years about the shape of what I was living inside. And then I opened my laptop and I began to prepare. I contacted Carol Briesmeyer, an estate attorney whose office was above a sandwich shop downtown, accessible by a narrow staircase that smelled permanently of pastrami. She was practical and gray-haired and wore bifocals on a beaded chain, and had the specific professional demeanor of someone who has heard every version of family dysfunction and found none of it remarkable. I brought her the bank's letter, my grandfather's death certificate, requested through Vital Records 2 weeks earlier, the birthday card with the handwritten account note, and the 4-page letter from the envelope Delphine had given me on my 25th birthday. Carol read everything. Yellow legal pad, blue pen. She looked up over her bifocals and said, "The handwritten letter, depending on how a court reads its language in context with the account records, could constitute a testamentary expression of intent, combined with evidence of unauthorized liquidation of a custodial account for which you were the designated beneficiary, and a closure authorization signed by someone without clearly documented standing to act on your behalf at that time. This is not nothing." Flat voice. Complete precision. I understood she meant, this is actually quite a lot. The 11 months that followed were not simple. Depositions in a conference room with bad coffee. Interrogatories. Document production on both sides. My parents' attorney, a man named Gerald Firth, was skilled at a particular technique, making the wronged party appear to be the aggressor. He said the word family 11 times in his opening statement. He described me as an estranged daughter motivated by emotional grievance dressed in legal clothing. He suggested my mother had acted in good faith under grief, within authority she believed she had. He was doing what good attorneys do. The problem was the facts. There were calls from Marcus every few weeks from outside, lowered voice beginning, "Is there any way to handle this without," and then stopping because he couldn't choose how to finish. I told him he didn't have to be involved. He said he knew. He called again the next week. That, more than anything, told me who he was. There were messages from my mother. The first several were composed in careful, full name measured language. Then at 2:17 on a Wednesday morning she sent, "You are doing this because you want to punish us and you have always been selfish and your grandfather would be ashamed." I screenshotted it. I dated it. I filed it. Not because I needed it as evidence. Because I keep everything. I have kept everything for 14 years. It is the only practice that has never failed me. Carol Briesmeyer built the case without drama, piece by piece. Bank records, the original account documentation, the closure authorization with my mother's signature, the power of attorney with its scope language, which, when read carefully, applied to specific management actions during a defined period of my grandfather's illness, and did not extend to liquidating custodial accounts held in beneficiary designation for a third party, particularly not a third party who, at the time of closure, was 22 years old. Because here is the structural point Carol returned to more than once. A custodial account designated for a minor does not remain in custodial arrangement after the beneficiary turns 25. At that point the account belongs to the beneficiary. The correct action would have been to contact me and arrange transfer. That had never happened, which meant the account had been sitting accessible to the custodian of record beyond any point at which that access was legally appropriate, and had been closed and redirected without my knowledge or consent, 3 years after it should already have come to me. Gerald Firth argued that family financial arrangements are frequently informal, and that my estrangement complicated standard notification. Carol noted, without raising her voice, that estrangement is not a legal category that alters fiduciary obligations. He argued the funds benefited the broader household. She noted that benefit to other family members does not mitigate breach of duty toward the specifically named beneficiary. He argued the handwritten letter was informal and non-binding. The document specialist's analysis, which Carol placed on the table last, described it as structurally consistent with a testamentary expression of specific intent. The hearing was a Tuesday in October. I wore a gray blazer and black slacks, and the expression I have spent years building. Not closed, not aggressive, just still. My father looked tired in a new way, as though something had settled into his face that hadn't been there before. My mother was in a blue blazer she had bought for the occasion, sitting very straight, her gaze arranged to the middle distance in the careful way of someone who has decided in advance not to look at something. The Honorable Patricia O'Say. Close-cropped gray hair. reading glasses on a thin silver chain. The quality of absolute stillness that belongs to people who have made consequential decisions for so long that agitation has simply stopped being a resource they spend. She reviewed the materials with the complete, neutral attention of someone who gives every case what it requires and nothing more and nothing less. She cited statute by number. She described the custodial instrument and its designated beneficiary. She described the scope language of the power of attorney and what it did and did not authorize. She described the fiduciary obligation attached to a custodian regarding a named beneficiary. She described the timeline of the account's existence beyond the appropriate custodial period, and what the law had required to happen at that point, and what the evidence showed had happened instead. During the afternoon recess, I went to the water fountain in the hallway. My mother came to stand nearby. There is a long history between us of filling silence, she with words, me with compliance. We had both apparently grown past that. She looked at me with an expression I could not fully categorize because it was made of things I had never seen on her face at the same time. Fear, something that might have been genuine grief, and underneath both, a calculation that was still running. She said quietly, "Renata, we can still." I looked at her. I did not say anything. Not because I had nothing to say. I have had things sealed up in a particular chamber for 14 years. I said nothing because silence is the only response that cannot be reframed. Every word I gave her was material she could work with. She waited several seconds and then she stopped, and she went back inside. When court reconvened, Judge Osei delivered her findings. She was thorough and precise and cited everything by statute and described every element of the evidence and what the law required of it. She described the compounded interest on the principal over 8 years at the applicable rate. She described legal costs. She addressed each argument that had been raised and explained exactly why the applicable law did not support it. Then she looked up from her papers. In a voice that contained no theater, no excess, nothing beyond the words themselves. The plaintiff's claim is upheld. 5 words. The room did not erupt. My parents' attorney said something procedural. My father placed his hand flat on the table and looked at it. My mother's posture, that straight, prepared, blue blazer posture, did not visibly break, but something behind it did, and I saw it move through her eyes in less than a second before she contained it again, because she has always been able to contain things. It is one of the things we have in common, she and I. Neither of us breaks where people can see it. Carol Briesmeyer shook my hand in the corridor and said, "Good work." From her that was a standing ovation. I received it as one. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 11 minutes. The sun was low, October light in Ohio, which is a particular gold I will associate with this moment for the rest of my life. Sarah was at school. I had a gas station receipt in my cup holder from 2 weeks ago. I looked at it. I thought about a summer porch and an account number read to me twice. I thought about a sticky note that said "Eat this" and a bedroom pointed to on the left and 3 mugs filled without thinking. I thought about a small person in a green jacket extending her hand because she trusted me completely. I was not euphoric. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was the specific, quiet exhaustion of someone who has been right about something important for a very long time and has finally been told so in language with legal standing and citations. That is not joy. It is something that settles rather than rises. Something you feel in the bones rather than the chest. I started the car. I went to pick up my daughter. The fallout arrived in the forms I expected and several I did not. Marcus called within an hour. From his car, from the parking lot of his office, needing to not be at his desk for this. He cried in the particular way of someone who has been holding something down for years and has been given permission to let it come up. He said he hadn't known about the account. I believe him. He is not capable of the sustained, deliberate concealment that knowing would have required. He is a person who was handed a family narrative at 14, and has been doing his careful best with it ever since. He is not a villain in this story. He never was. My mother called 4 times in 10 days. The first time I answered. She wanted to explain, and she explained, and the explanation was a genuine account of genuinely difficult things. Her father's illness, the weight of the estate, the financial pressures of those years, decisions made under grief that she believed, she said, she had standing to make. I believe the difficulty was real. But difficulty is not authorization. Grief is not authorization. Those are different things, and the difference matters. I listened for 9 minutes. I said I had to go. I didn't answer the other 3 calls. I'm not proud of everything I've done in my life, but I am not ashamed of that. My father sent a card, physical, mailed in his handwriting that looks like it belongs to a different era. Said, "I know this doesn't fix things. I don't know if things can be fixed. Nothing else. It is the most honest thing he has ever communicated to me, and I keep it in the same folder as everything else." 2 women from my parents' church reached out through social media with messages structured as concern and functioning as reconnaissance. I recognized the structure. I did not respond. Delphine was making tea when I told her. She set down the kettle and went still in the particular way she has when something happens that she has been expecting for a long time. She turned and looked at me. She said, "Your grandfather would have liked knowing." She picked the kettle back up and finished making the tea. She filled 3 mugs. She has always, without exception, without pause or consideration, filled 3 mugs. There is a photograph on my refrigerator. It has been there since Sarah was 2. My grandfather is sitting in a lawn chair on Delphine's back porch at a summer gathering. Sarah is in his lap. They are both looking at something to the left of the frame, outside the photograph entirely, invisible to anyone looking at it, and they are both completely absorbed in whatever it is. He is close to 80. She is 18 months. They had met that day for the first and only time, and within 10 minutes of his arrival he had found her and settled her in his lap with the unhesitating competence of a man who has always known where to direct his attention. He did not wait for an introduction. He did not look to anyone else for permission. He found her and he held her. That photograph is what I look at when I need to remember what the opposite of what my parents did actually looks like. Not the court documents. Not the bank letter. The photograph of a man who saw my daughter and held her without hesitation, without qualification, without needing to protect anything except the actual child in front of him. I am 30 years old. Sarah's 10. She reads 3 grade levels above her peers and corrects my spelling with the satisfaction of someone who has discovered a superpower and intends to deploy it constantly. She made a 4-slide presentation on bioluminescence in the deep ocean for a dinner attended only by me, her, and Aunt Delphine, and she prefaced it by saying, "I know you're not experts, but please hold your questions until the end." She has my eyes and my stubbornness and, increasingly, my grandfather's instinct for making the important things concrete. She does not yet know the full details of the legal case. She knows I fought for something that was mine and I won. She received this information with the equanimity of a person for whom her mother's competence is simply a given. Nothing I have ever done compares to raising a child who assumes my competence. There is a particular erosion that happens when you have been defined, for years, by someone else's story about you. My parents' story was, Renata made choices. Renata was the difficult one. The family protected itself as families must. In that story I am the author of my own exclusion. My daughter is a consequence. The locked door, the missing mug, the 3-page letter with no child's name in it, the account closed with a signature while I was not looking. All of it reasonable management of an unreasonable situation. I was never interested in arguing with that story directly. Arguments are material. I was interested in having documentation to stand next to it and let people read them together. My grandfather's 4-page letter. The account number he read to me twice. The birthday card with one added line in careful handwriting. The bank letter with the date and the signature. The power of attorney with its scope language. The court judgment with its 5 words. Families that protect their image and families that protect their people look similar from a distance for a very long time. Same neighborhood. Same church. Same pale hardwood floors. Same careful language about doing what was necessary. But under real pressure, the kind where the story stops being sufficient and the documents are on the table, they are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. My grandfather protected the person. Delphine protected the person. And Sarah, who was the difficulty, who was the situation, who was not named in a 3-page letter on blue stationery, grew up in a house where someone protected the person because I made sure of it. I made sure of it because I had been shown what it looked like. By a woman who pointed to a bedroom on the left and filled 3 mugs without thinking and told me, on the most important night of my life, that I had always been exactly what a person should be. I kept everything. The court judgment. The bank letter. The birthday card with the handwritten line. The screenshot from 2:17 in the morning. My father's card with 12 words. The photograph on the refrigerator of a man and a baby looking at something only they could see. The library book, if I'm honest. I returned it eventually, paid the late fine 43 cents, and that receipt is somewhere in a folder too. I cannot help it. I keep everything. I have always kept everything. The T was the first sign. The signature was the last proof. Everything in between was me, quietly, without announcement or performance, becoming someone my family had not prepared for. That is the thing about being underestimated. They do the work of underestimating you. You do not have to do anything except wait and document, and refuse to allow the story to be taken from you. The judge spoke, and what she said was the truth. If you have ever been written out of your own story and told to be grateful for the editing, or if you have ever held onto a piece of paper without fully knowing why, and understood years later exactly why, leave a comment below. I read every single one, and more people than you know are living inside some version of this. If you want to be here when I tell the next one, you already know what to do. Take good care of yourself, the kind of care that has to be earned before it can be given.